All right, folks. It's True Historian. The I'm here with my top 10 list of top 10 best presidents or strongest presidents, if you will. This was a tough list, but I'm gonna give you counting down from 10 the names and a quick sum of what made them strong presidents. All right, number 10 is James Monroe. From 1817 to 1825, he was president. Now, everybody knows about the Monroe Doctrine. It was one of the reasons he was so strong. Because not only did it establish America not only as a young country, but they established America as a strong nation and even an up-and-coming empire, which we later became. But it also declared that to the European countries back then that were hungry to colonize, that they couldn't just pick on the South American or other in that Western Hemisphere. And so Monroe basically put the world on notice that if they continued to push their aggressive colonization, that they would have to fight. But James Monroe, I mean, as we know, wasn't a guy who spoke and not acted. No, he was a man who meant what he said when he said it. But he also, at the same time, declaring that the European powers stopped their colonization of the Western world, he also built up our infrastructure, which was behind at the time. And this is in the wake of the War of 1812. And James Monroe was also a Revolutionary War veteran and a founding father at the same time. Though he was a lot younger, he was more an aide to Jefferson and even to Washington, who he served under in the colonial army. But yeah, he was a strong president, most notably for the War of the Monroe Doctrine, and also the purchase of Florida that happened under his deal. And he was the first president ever to tour the continental United States. Number 9, I'm going to give you James Madison in 1809 to 1817. Yes, he was the predecessor to James Monroe. And even though the British were able to burn the White House during the War of 1812, James Madison led this nation to a victory in the War of 1812. And yes, there were other things too that Madison did. And Madison, like Monroe, was a founding father. But he was a strong man, even though he was only 5 foot. 5 foot something. It's pretty short. Our shortest president ever. But he let the British know and other European nations that they weren't allowed to bully us any longer. Now, the War of 1812, if you don't know, didn't just spontaneously start. For a couple of decades, the British were always doing his impression tactics on American sailors and even American merchantmen, seasoned ships, and impressing captured sailors and merchantmen into British service. Well, uh, Adams started putting things in place for them not to do it. And then even Jefferson did it too. But it boiled over into the War of 1812, though initially the fighting didn't start until 1814. But in 1815, we not only won the last battle, in the Battle of New Orleans, but we also won, and in the victory of the war, and even the diplomatic link with John Quincy Adams handling the negotiations, it signified that the U.S. was a strong nation, and it wasn't a fluke that we won the revolution. Now, number 8, though he was young, John F. Kennedy was a very strong president, though his term was cut short with the assassination on November 22nd, 1963. Now, everybody can picture the Cuban Missile Crisis, the height of the Cold War, space race, and yes, there were some mistakes in there. He wasn't perfect, but Kennedy, who got the Medal of Honor as a World War II, a Navy lieutenant, World War II, was a man, and yes, he's a Democrat, and unfortunately, Democrats today are not like John F. Kennedy was. John F. Kennedy was a nationalist, Democrat, who believed this nation, first, policies, and that freedom anywhere must be defended to be secured. And he was also he was influential and big in the civil rights movement. But ultimately, what got him killed was the fact that he stood against the communist push, especially the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Russia had missiles in Cuba pointed at Florida, and Cuba is 90 miles away from the Florida coast. So when you come, and then the president ordered the 19 ships to barricade or block off Cuba, surrounded Cuba with a lot of Navy ships, and forced Russia to pull their nuclear missiles out of Cuba. And then there's number 7 would be Dwight D. Eisenhower, and that's from 1953 to 1961. He's 7th on my list because not only did he also deal with a lot of the tensions of the Cold War and the height in the 50s, he made this nation better through a lot of infrastructure, the highway systems, but he also helped to desegregate the U.S. Like I said, Kennedy did it after him, but when that rule came down, with the Board of Education rule, the Brown v. Board of Education, and the Supreme Court ruled to reintegrate the school systems, and it was a boneheaded governor in Arkansas that wanted to stop it from happening. Dwight Eisenhower wasn't afraid to do whatever he had to do to keep the Arkansas governor from obstructing the reintegration. And that Little Rock, Arkansas 9, Little Rock 9, or whatever you want to call it. And Dwight Eisenhower also warned, and too bad people haven't listened